Welcome back. In this video, I am going to talk about Scala classes. Let's start with the simplest form of a Scala class. A Scala class definition looks like this. You start with the keyword class, give a name to the class, and place the body of the class in a pair of curly braces. You can create abstract, private, or protected classes by using appropriate keywords. But you cannot use a public access modifier. That's not allowed. A Scala class is public by default. So, if you want to create a public class, don't use any other access modifier. It becomes public by default. There is one more important point that you should notice here. Unlike Java, a Scala source file can contain multiple public classes. If you programmed in Java, you already know what it means. A Java source file can have only one public class, but that restriction is no more valid in Scala. You can define multiple public classes in a single source file and name the source file whatever you want, right? There is no need to match the file name with the public class name. Great. Let's come back to the class definition. Like any other object-oriented language, you can add fields and methods to a class. The field radius and the method draw are public because we don't specify an access modifier. You must initialize the radius with some value because you cannot define a variable in Scala with no value. Class methods are like Scala functions. The only difference is that you define them as part of the class definitions and they become a member of a class. Otherwise, everything that you learned about Scala functions is also applicable to a method. So far so good. Now it's time to look at Scala specific behavior. When you define a var field in Scala class, the compiler generates two methods. Let me show you. Type c.r and press tab. Voila. There are two methods. The first one is the reader and the second one is the writer. In the previous video, I talked about the Java getter and a setter method, right? The first method is your getter and the second method is your setter. You don't need to define them. You get it free. Scala compiler automatically generates them. You can call the reader method like this and you can call the writer method like this. But no one calls the writer using this notation. We can simply call it like this. These automatically generated readers and writers will save you from creating default getter and setter methods. In the previous video, I also talked about the need to add some validations to these methods. For example, you don't want people to set the radius to a negative number. In fact, you want to add validation to the writer method, right? How will you do that? Scala compiler is automatically generating them. You don't have control over those methods, right? Well, you have to go back to the Java style. Create a private variable to hold the radius. Then implement your custom reader and writer methods. That's how we do it in Java, right? Let's look at the code. Now we create a private var for the radius. Earlier we created a default public var. In that case, Scala generates two public methods for the radius, the reader and the writer. Now we have a private var and Scala will still generate the reader and the writer methods. But now those methods will be private because we made the radius private. Great. Now we are ready to write a custom reader and the writer. The code for the reader is extremely simple. Start with def, give a method name, place an equal to symbol to start the body, and then write the body. We don't have much to be done. Just return the private variables. That's it. The code for the writer is also simple. Start with def and give a method name. The writer name follows a special notation. We will come back to the notation, but for now let's move on. Since it is a writer method, we need to take the new radius as input. place an equal to symbol to start the body and then write the body. Now you have the opportunity to implement the validation. If the new radius is invalid, throw an exception. Else, set the private variable. That's it. Great. Let's come back to the special naming of the writer method. The name of the writer method follows a particular syntax. A string, then an underscore, and finally a equal to symbol. If you are creating a writer method, you must follow this naming convention. To demonstrate the benefit of following this naming convention, I have added another method, setRadius. The writer method radius and the normal method setRadius are functionally same. They do the same thing. The only difference is in their naming convention. Let's compile the class and create an object. Type C dot and then press the tab. Now we have the reader and writer like earlier. The P underscore radius is private, but we implemented our custom reader and writer. These two methods will allow us to read and write the radius like earlier. Set the radius and get the radius. If you try to set the radius to a negative value, you will see an exception. The important point to note is this. You can start with the public fields in your class definition. And after a few months, when you realize that you need to add some validations to the public fields, you can modify the class definition to use a private field and convert the public fields to a pair of custom method. In all this, the downstream code never realizes that you change the public field to a public method. Great. Now the special naming convention for the writer method. We use the radius method to set the radius of the circle, right? Let's try to do the same thing using the setRadius method. Oops, you can't use the setRadius with an equal to operator. But we were able to do the same thing with radius method, right? That's because the radius method is using a special naming convention. That naming convention is an instruction to the compiler to allow an equal to operator on that method. If you want to use the setRadius method, you can use it as a standard method call, but you can't use it with an equal to operator. Great. So the takeaway from this example is this. When you need the default reader and writer, use a public field. When you need custom reader and writer, use a private field and implement your custom reader and writer methods. Now, one last thing. A simple quiz. Just look at this code. I changed the type of the radius to a val. Earlier, it was a var. You already learned that when you create a public var, Scala will create a public reader and a public writer. When you create a private var, Scala will create a private reader and a private writer. Now the question is this. Will Scala create a reader and a writer for this example? Pause the video and think about it. We change the var to a val, and you know that the val is a constant. You cannot change it. So, Scala will not create a writer for this example. There is no point doing that. It will only create a reader. In this code, val radius is public, and hence you will get a public reader. Let me ask you another simple question. When I need a reader and a writer both, I create a var field. When I need a reader only and don't want the writer, I create a val field. What if I don't need any one of those? Neither a reader nor a writer. How to do that? Well, the answer is simple. Use a private val and do not implement public methods to access it. Great. That's all about fields and methods in Scala class. In the next video, I'll talk about constructors in Scala class. Thank you for watching Learning Journal. Keep learning and keep growing.